Thank you for staying tuned. How time flies. Interesting conversation there with Mr. Roberts. But let's continue along that line, as the issue of fuel subsidy removal in Nigeria has been a back and forth issues for several years. Just like Robert said, successive governments keep telling Nigerians that the fuel subsidy payment is impeding progress in other sectors of the economy. Now, notwithstanding going by the immediate decision by the current administration to shelve its decision to remove the fuel subsidy through the suspension of the implementation of the Petroleum Industry Act by 18 months. Fuel scarcity emerged at causing queues in filling stations across major cities of the country. However, the current fuel scarcity in Lagos, Abuja, and some other states have been blamed on the issues surrounding the bad or wrong grade of fuel, that's contaminated fuel in the market, as well as undersupply from the NNPC. Well, let's look more and understand this. Joining me via Skype from Abuja is the partner at Commercial and Energy Law Practice, Candelp. He's also the director at Aspen Energy, Mr. Israel Aye. Mr. Aye, it's good to see you today. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Tolu. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. Let's get to business now. I am worried that after all of the contaminated PMS and all that we hear and all the press releases that we've seen, after being quiet for about 72 hours, and we are hearing that the NMDPRA is responsible for this. You're a professional in the sector. How did this happen? What do you think? I don't understand. What's the process? Someone ought to have confirmed this product before it got into town. Mr. Aye, can you hear me?
Well, of course. I mean, again, the things we complicate. Yeah, I was wondering if you can hear me.
Go ahead, I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. No, I'm just saying that there are many things we complicate unnecessarily. I mean, this is maybe bordering on accountability, transparency, and those kinds of values, effectively. I mean, again, a lot of the times, the things that should otherwise be dealt with in the space of, say, transparency, like I said, where we have to experience impunity, we make it into a psychic allegation. As far as I'm concerned, there should be a process for testing products, particularly have a virtual monopoly in terms of who brings in products for public consumption. So somebody should be telling us. I think the Nigerian public should demand some sort of explanation. There is a saying that I stumbled into many years ago, that we should not waste the crisis. Unfortunately, we tend to waste crisis around. I mean, as it is, everybody has thrown up their hands in the air to say, oh, bad products came. How did bad products come in? I mean, basic protocol around the importation of materials should be product testing at the port of business. I mean, at the port of the exports, there should be product testing at the point of receiving the products. And if that doesn't happen, somebody sufficiently high should be explaining to Nigerians what has happened, especially if you inconvenience as costs and the potential costs to the economy within the last few days.
Interesting. Now, the question of subsidy, we talked about this earlier on the show, opening up the market. We've seen diesel and kerosene being opened up, liberalized, but the price is still high up there. So what do you think? Will it not be the same thing if that happens to the PMS market?
Well, again, that's a chicken and egg question, right? And we've said this many times before, that when you talk about the deregulation of petroleum or the downstream, the petroleum downstream, what you're really talking about is a fairly more comprehensive conversation. It's not just about floating prices so they become what they have to become. I mean, if you and it's probably the wrong conversation. I mean, the regulation of the downstream is potentially different from the removal of subsidy. we talk about the removal of subsidy and having the price fixing conversation. Okay, the price control conversation. I was saying that that is too costly, that is inefficient, that does not have any sort of compound interest or even sort of knock-on benefit for the economy. We should be moving away from price fixing, from price control, moving towards deregulation. When we're talking about deregulation, what it is that they're opening up that market space for demand and supply to intersect, and to be able to leverage local, those sort of things that are peculiar to us to create the best possible outcomes to the country. And what are those kinds of outcomes we're looking at? The first one definitely is is jobs and economic opportunities for Nigeria, because we are a crude producing nation. What it means is that in a fully deregulated sector, potentially you will incentivize establishment of refineries, processing companies, and the likes to come in to settle, and then you can create jobs in the process. Potentially also, when that starts to happen over time, you will be able to create, you will be able to intervene in the area of supply, and we will be able to take the benefit of being a producer nation. But that's a fairly comprehensive thing, and what needs to be happening is a policy framework, and that exists, by the way. There's the oil policy of 2007, I believe, which contains very copious and detailed provisions on what the deregulation of the downstream looks like. And that's what we need to be articulating, communicating to the Nigerian public, and putting a transition program in place in order to be able to achieve it. But if we talk about the removal of subsidy in isolation, then we will end up in a rut. And that's the kind of conversation we're having now, which is counterproductive and secular in nature, and it's not helping anybody. For whatever reason, the federal government states, and I do not want to second guess what the reasons may or may not be. The regulation has been put forward by 18 months, and they invited the NNPC to supply a figure to be plugged into the into the budget to provide subsidies. The first number we got, and based on oil prices that were slightly lower than what we currently have, was around 3 trillion naira. Can you imagine what 3 trillion naira would do? Or what the alternative use of 3 trillion naira means for Nigeria. By the way, if you think about the 2022 budget, at least 60% of the budget would be it's probably going to be funded by borrowing. So are we going to be borrowing to subsidize PMS up to the tune of 3 trillion naira? Not to mention the fact that there is no sector, as far as I'm aware, that has a 3 trillion naira allocation. Not health, not education, not the critical sectors of the economy that drives the country forward. Why would we be doing that? So it's totally mindless. And for me, it is, look, whatever it is not sustainable. We can ill afford it now. It is definitely not sustainable into the future. We need to sit down, articulate a program to get out of this mess, communicate it to the Nigerian public, engage across Skype, and do it at once. Short-term interventions, mid-term programs, long-term vision, engage with the people.
Implication.
I don't know if that's making sense.
Yes, it is. Mr. Aye, you're making real sense. What could be the legal implication of this 18-month extension, and what effect could it have on the entire act?
Well, the legal implication, that's probably the simple part. I'm not, I probably need to try and remember now. There was a time set for the deregulation to happen under the PIA. So definitely the 18 months postponement has taken us out of that time frame, but that's not a problem. Some people have suggested perhaps that the PIA should be amended to accommodate this change. I think that is not the right thing to do. What would be the right thing to do is simply to use the finance bill, which is an appropriation bill, to suspend whatever provision or whatever programming there is, and allow this to happen. So from a legal point of view, that can be sorted out, that can be fixed. Okay. So in terms of the legal implication, it is what it is. The basis for routine subsidy no longer exists, but the government through the act of the legislature can modify, suspend, elongate, extend that provision, and it's still an act of the parliament, on the same sort of level as the Petroleum Industry Act. So it's not an illegality, if that's what people want to get into. And for me, those are also probably, how do I put it, not the real issue. And I don't think we should be measured on the minor. It can be done legally, properly, in order to let me tell you what my thinking is on this. That part of the challenge with moving to the deregulated regime historically is our inability to plan. Okay, what do I mean by that? That if you're moving from a regime such as the one we have into a new one, everywhere in the world, you have to go through a transition. Okay? Brexit didn't happen the day England voted for Brexit. There was a transition. If you're moving into, COP26, there are all kinds of mini transitions within it. A date is named in the future. We are familiar with those 2020, 2025, 2050, and you can put a program in place. And what that sort of program then says, potentially, would be things like, well, we need to move away from this sort of regime to that new regime, because the law is the law. The law has taken away Section 6. With the abrogation of the repeal of the Petroleum Act, the effect of Section 6.1, which empowers or mandates the president to fix prices, has gone. Okay, now you can make certain arguments around that. I don't want to get into that. So routine subsidies no longer exist. What really now needs to happen is for us to put a program in place to realize what policy and law have provided a platform for, the deregulation of the downstream, to create those kinds of benefits for the economy and the Nigerian people.
Let you go a little bit of challenge with the audio, but we're trying to pick it up. What's your projection with regards to this sector, despite this extension and the challenge that we face? Do you think that expected investment will come as we have been, projecting?
Well, the last speaker, and I really enjoyed listening to him, I thought said some really very, very many wonderful things. One of the most critical things for investment across the world, would be stability of laws and policies and regulatory positions. Stability basically is one of the really big things about attracting investment, whether local or international. Okay? Now, what happened was that we created an atmosphere of instability over many years in respect to the petroleum industry. Thankfully, with the Petroleum Industry Act, we've started to solve that. But beyond that, you would imagine that money would be waiting to see how consistent our policy positions, our regulatory frameworks, how those are with the statutory position. Whether we're walking the talk. And it is only in that, so there's going to be a lag between when you make the law, when you introduce an intent, to when you start to see the benefits. That's really the point, yeah? Now, that is where, so in a sense, as much as I do not like the 18-month extension, my attitude essentially is that we probably have an opportunity here to fix this once and for all, put a transition program in place. As simple as that. And well thought through transition program, which will then say, this is the law, this is what we can do now. This is what, we're going to discontinue this, move to a full market regime, and in order to intervene in the supply side, we anticipate that we'll give this many refining licenses out. These are probably the incentives we're putting out to incentivize refining. These are the sort of short-term palliatives we're putting out for those who will be hardest hit by the removal of the subsidy. Okay? And these are the market conditions that we're putting in place to ensure a level playing field for everybody to be able to come and play.
Interesting conversation there. I must thank you so much, partner, commercial and energy law practice, Candelp, as well as director at Aspen Energy. I've been speaking to Mr. Israel Aye. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us on Business Nigeria. We really do appreciate this.
My pleasure. So I truly appreciate the invitation. Thank you.